The telegram from Aunt Margaret arrived on a Tuesday morning in September 1885, and Fiona Dalton knew before she even opened it that her life in Boston was about to end. She stood in the parlor of her family's Beacon Hill townhouse, her hands trembling as she read the words that confirmed her worst fears. Her father had arranged a marriage to a banker's son she had met exactly twice, and the wedding was scheduled for November. What made her voice crack through the house like thunder was not sadness but pure, unfiltered rage, and when she shouted her refusal loud enough that the servants dropped dishes in the kitchen 2 floors below, her mother fainted directly onto the imported Persian rug. "Fiona Dalton, a lady, does not raise her voice above a whisper," her father said when he returned home that evening, his face red with embarrassment at what the neighbors must have heard. "You bellow like a dock worker, you laugh like a hyena, you have the volume of a steam whistle, and I will not have it any longer." Fiona stood before him in the study, her tall frame rigid with defiance, her auburn hair threatening to escape its pins. At 22 years old, she had spent her entire life being told to speak softer, to giggle quietly behind her hand, to modulate her tone until she practically disappeared. But her voice was not something she could control easily. It came from deep in her chest, rich and resonant and utterly unsuitable for a woman of her station. Teachers had rapped her knuckles. Her mother had given her endless elocution lessons. Society matrons had turned away in horror when she forgot herself at parties and laughed with genuine amusement at something funny. "I will not marry Harold Pembroke," she said, keeping her voice as level as possible, though it still filled the room like pipe organ music. "I do not love him. I do not even like him." "Love is irrelevant," her father replied. "You will marry him, or you will leave this house with nothing but the clothes on your back. Those are your options." Fiona thought of Harold Pembroke with his wet lips and wandering hands, the way he had cornered her at the engagement party her parents had thrown without her consent, how he had whispered that once they were married he would teach her proper silence. She thought of a lifetime of suffocation, of shrinking herself down to nothing, of never laughing freely or speaking her mind or existing as anything more than a decorative object in someone else's home. "Then I choose to leave," she said. Her father's face went purple. "You will be ruined. No decent family will take you in." "I have Aunt Cordelia in Hot Spring," Fiona said, referencing her father's estranged sister who had scandalized the family 15 years earlier by moving to the Dakota Territory and opening a boarding house. "She wrote to me last Christmas. She said I would always have a place with her if I needed it." "Cordelia is dead to this family," her father spat. "If you go to her, you will be as well." Fiona felt something break loose in her chest, some tether that had been holding her to this life of constant criticism and shame. "Then consider me dead," she said, and her voice rang out so clearly and firmly that her father actually took a step backward. She left 3 days later with one trunk, the money she had saved from birthday gifts over the years, and her mother's tears still wet on her traveling dress. The journey west took 2 weeks of trains and stagecoaches, each mile taking her further from everything she had known and closer to something that felt simultaneously terrifying and liberating. By the time she reached Hot Springs War, South Dakota in early October, her traveling clothes were covered in dust and her hair had given up any pretense of proper styling, but she felt more alive than she had in years. Aunt Cordelia met her at the stage station, a weathered woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands. "You have your mother's face and your grandmother's voice," she said after embracing Fiona warmly. "I assume that voice is what finally drove you west?" "They wanted me to marry a man who promised to teach me silence," Fiona replied. Cordelia laughed, a sound as big and unrestrained as Fiona's own. "Well, you will find no one trying to silence you here. Or at least you will find that the men who try are easily ignored. Come, let me show you your new home." Hot Springs was a small but growing town, built around the natural warm springs that gave it its name. The main street boasted a general store, a saloon, a doctor's office, a small church, and Cordelia's boarding house, a sturdy 2-story building with a wide front porch and cheerful yellow shutters. Inside, everything was clean and well-maintained, if simpler than what Fiona had known in Boston. Cordelia housed a rotating cast of characters, miners passing through on their way to the Black Hills, traveling salesmen, a school teacher, and occasionally cowboys from the surrounding ranches when they came to town. "You will earn your keep," Cordelia said, showing Fiona to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. "Cooking, cleaning, washing linens. It is hard work but honest work, and no one will criticize the volume of your voice while you do it." Fiona threw herself into her new life with determination. She learned to cook meals for a dozen people at once, to scrub floors until they gleamed, to wash and hang linens in the Dakota wind. Her hands, which had been soft and useless in Boston, developed calluses and strength. Her back grew strong from hauling water and wood, and slowly, carefully, she began to let her voice free. At first it was small things. She called out to Cordelia from 2 rooms away instead of walking to speak quietly beside her. She laughed at dinner when one of the boarders told a joke, and no one fainted or looked scandalized. She sang while she worked, old songs she had learned as a child, and Cordelia joined in instead of shushing her. Each small freedom felt like a revelation. But the town of Hot Springs was not all welcoming. There were women in the small community who had worked hard to bring civilization to the frontier, and they had very specific ideas about what civilized meant. Mrs. Harriet Sutherland, the minister's wife, was chief among them. She ran the ladies' auxiliary with an iron fist and had appointed herself the arbiter of proper behavior for all women in town. Fiona's first encounter with Mrs. Sutherland came on a Sunday morning in late October. Cordelia had suggested they attend church services, more for the social aspect than religious devotion, and Fiona had agreed. She wore her best dress, pinned her hair as neatly as possible, and walked with Cordelia to the small white church at the edge of town. The service was pleasant enough, though the minister's sermon was rather dull. Afterward, the congregation gathered outside to socialize, and Cordelia introduced Fiona to various townspeople. Most were polite if reserved, clearly unsure what to make of this Boston lady who had appeared out of nowhere to work in a boarding house. Then Mrs. Sutherland approached, a thin woman in her 40s with a pinched face and calculating eyes. "Miss Dalton," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "how lovely to meet you. Your aunt speaks very highly of you." "Thank you, Mrs. Sutherland," Fiona replied, trying to keep her voice soft and appropriate. "It is a pleasure to meet you as well." "I understand you come from Boston, such a civilized city. You must find our little town rather rustic." "I find it charming," Fiona said honestly. "Everyone has been very kind." "Well, we do try to maintain certain standards here, despite the wilderness around us. Perhaps you would like to join our ladies' auxiliary? We meet every Thursday afternoon to work on various charitable projects and ensure that Hot Springs remains a place of refinement and culture." Before Fiona could respond, a crash came from across the street where some men were unloading supplies from a wagon. A barrel had fallen and broken open, spilling apples everywhere. Without thinking, Fiona called out, "Watch out for the nails in that barrel. Someone might step on them." Her voice carried across the street clearly, and the men nodded their thanks. But when Fiona turned back, she found Mrs. Sutherland staring at her with undisguised horror. "My dear girl," Mrs. Sutherland said, her voice icy, "a lady does not shout in public like a common fishwife. Really, I expected better from someone of your supposed breeding." Fiona felt her face flush. "I was only trying to prevent someone from getting hurt." "There are proper ways to communicate, and then there are the ways of the uncouth and unrefined. I think perhaps you are not quite ready for the ladies' auxiliary after all. We maintain certain standards." With that, Mrs. Sutherland turned and walked away, gathering several other women to her like chicks to a hen. Cordelia squeezed Fiona's arm. "Pay her no mind. Harriet Sutherland thinks civilization is measured by the volume of one's whisper. She forgets that out here, sometimes you need to speak loudly just to be heard over the wind." But the damage was done. Over the following weeks, Fiona found herself increasingly shunned by the respectable women of Hot Springs. They would cross the street to avoid greeting her. They would lower their voices and stop talking when she entered the general store. When she tried to attend a church social, Mrs. Sutherland made sure she was given the coldest shoulder possible, and several women actually turned their backs when Fiona approached. The problem was compounded by the fact that Fiona could not seem to control her voice to meet their standards. She was too enthusiastic, too loud, too present. When she laughed, people 3 buildings away could hear her. When she called to Cordelia from the back of the boarding house, the entire street knew they were running low on flour. Her voice was not something she could compress into the tiny, whispering package that respectable women were supposed to present to the world. "Let them have their tea parties and their whispered gossip," Cordelia said one evening as they prepared dinner. "You do not need their approval to live a good life." But Fiona felt the familiar shame creeping back in, the sense that there was something fundamentally wrong with her that could never be fixed. She had traveled 2,000 miles only to find the same rejection she had fled from in Boston. Maybe her father had been right. Maybe she was simply too much, too loud, too wrong to ever fit anywhere. November arrived with cold winds and the first hints of winter. The boarding house took on a new resident, a cowboy named Travis Jennings, who worked at the Running Creek Ranch about 10 miles outside of town. He had been hired on by the ranch owner, Robert Carson, to help manage a new herd of cattle they had purchased. The ranch's regular bunkhouse was full, so several of the hands were staying in town for a few months until new accommodations could be built. Travis was 25, tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that tended to fall into his eyes. He had a quiet, watchful manner and a slow smile that came rarely but seemed genuine when it appeared. He was unfailingly polite to Cordelia and Fiona, always the first to offer help carrying heavy items and the last to complain about anything. What struck Fiona most about Travis was the way he listened. In a world where most men either ignored women entirely or pretended to listen while obviously thinking about other things, Travis actually paid attention when someone spoke. He looked directly at the speaker, considered their words, and responded thoughtfully. It was such an unusual quality that Fiona found herself slightly off balance around him. Their first real conversation happened on a Saturday morning in mid-November. Fiona was out back of the boarding house, struggling to hang wet linens in the fierce Dakota wind. The sheets kept whipping out of her hands, and she was growing increasingly frustrated. Travis came around the corner carrying firewood and stopped when he saw her predicament. "Need a hand?" he asked. "These damn sheets have minds of their own today," Fiona said without thinking, then immediately cursed herself. A lady was not supposed to swear, and she had been trying so hard to be more careful. But Travis just set down his firewood and came over. "Wind's fierce today. Here, I will hold this end while you pin that side." They worked together in companionable silence for a few minutes, fighting the wind and the heavy, wet fabric. When they finally got the last sheet secured, Fiona was breathless and laughing. "Thank you," she said, her voice ringing out loud and clear in the cold air. "I thought I was going to end up wearing those sheets instead of hanging them." Travis smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Happy to help. You've got a good laugh, Miss Dalton. Sounds like joy." Fiona stopped, startled. In her entire life, no one had ever complimented her laugh. She had been told it was too loud, too raucous, too unladylike. She had been shushed and scolded and shamed for it. But Travis Jennings stood there looking at her like he had just stated a simple, obvious truth. "Most people tell me I laugh too loudly," she said carefully. Travis shrugged. "Most people are wrong about a lot of things. Nothing wrong with joy being loud. Better than misery being quiet, seems to me." He picked up his firewood and headed back toward the house, leaving Fiona standing among the flapping laundry, something warm and unfamiliar blooming in her chest. After that, she found herself noticing Travis more. The way he always cleaned his plate and thanked her for the meal. The way he offered to help Cordelia fix a loose step on the front porch without being asked. The way he spoke to his horse when he thought no one was listening. Gentle words of encouragement and affection. He was kind, she realized. Genuinely, quietly kind, in a way that seemed natural rather than performed. She also noticed that Travis was well respected among the other men in town, even though he was relatively new to the area. He had a reputation for being fair, for working hard, and for staying calm in difficult situations. Some of the older cowboys said he had grown up on a ranch in Texas, that he had learned the trade from his father before striking out on his own after his parents died. He was looking to save enough money to eventually buy his own small spread, nothing fancy, just enough land to run a modest herd and build a life. The next significant encounter between Fiona and Travis came on a cold Thursday afternoon in late November. Fiona had gone to the general store to purchase supplies for the boarding house, and she had been standing at the counter waiting for Mr. Peterson to tally her order when Mrs. Sutherland and two other ladies from the auxiliary had entered. Fiona had nodded politely in greeting, but the women had looked right through her as if she did not exist. She tried to ignore the slight, focusing on her list and the items Mr. Peterson was gathering, but then she overheard Mrs. Sutherland speaking to her companions, her voice just loud enough to ensure Fiona would hear. "I hear that Dalton woman laughing from 3 streets away yesterday," Mrs. Sutherland said, "absolutely braying like a donkey. How Cordelia tolerates it, I cannot imagine. Of course, Cordelia always did have questionable judgment about acceptable behavior." "Such a shame," one of the other women murmured. "She might be pretty if she learned to conduct herself properly, but what decent man would want a wife who sounds like that?" "No decent man at all," Mrs. Sutherland agreed. "Mark my words, she will end up a spinster working in that boarding house until she is old and gray." A woman who cannot control her voice cannot control anything. It shows a fundamental lack of character and breeding. Fiona's hands clenched on her shopping list, crumpling the paper. She felt her face burning with shame and anger. She wanted to turn around and confront them, to defend herself, but she knew it would only make things worse. If she raised her voice, she would only prove their point. If she whispered, they would not hear her anyway. She was trapped. Just as she had always been trapped in a world that demanded she be smaller and quieter than she was capable of being. Mr. Peterson finished tallying her order, his face carefully neutral, though Fiona suspected he had heard every word. She paid, gathered her parcels with shaking hands, and turned to leave. As she passed the 3 women, Mrs. Sutherland made a great show of moving aside as if Fiona might contaminate her by proximity. Fiona pushed through the door and out onto the wooden sidewalk, struggling not to cry. The autumn sun was bright but cold, and the wind cut through her shawl. She started walking quickly back toward the boarding house, her vision blurred with unshed tears. She did not see Travis coming around the corner until she nearly collided with him. He steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow, took one look at her face, and his expression shifted from surprise to concern. "Miss Dalton? What happened?" "Nothing," Fiona said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just some unkind words. It is nothing I have not heard before." Travis glanced past her toward the general store, where Mrs. Sutherland and her friends were visible through the window. His jaw tightened. "The ladies' auxiliary? How did you guess?" Fiona tried to smile, but it came out wrong. "They do enjoy their sense of superiority," Travis said. "Here, let me help you with those parcels." He took the heavier packages from her arms before she could protest, and they walked together back toward the boarding house. For a few minutes, neither spoke. Then Travis said, "My mother had a loud laugh too. She said it was because she was full of joy, and it had to come out somehow. My father used to say he fell in love with her laugh before he fell in love with her face." Fiona looked at him in surprise. "Really?" "Really. He said he heard her laughing at a dance, and he thought to himself, that is a woman who knows how to be happy. He wanted some of that happiness in his life." Travis glanced at her, and there was something warm in his eyes. He was right. Our house was always full of laughter. Made it a home, that sound. "Mrs. Sutherland says a woman who cannot control her voice cannot control anything," Fiona heard herself say. "She says it shows a lack of character and breeding." "Mrs. Sutherland wouldn't know character if it kicked her in the teeth," Travis said bluntly. "Begging your pardon for the language, but it is true. Character is about how you treat people, not how quietly you do it." They had reached the boarding house. Travis set the parcels down on the front porch and turned to face Fiona fully. "Miss Dalton, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you care what those women think?" Fiona was taken aback. I I do not want to be shunned. I do not want to be alone. But you are not alone. You have your aunt. You have the people in this boarding house who think you are fine just as you are. And you have—" He paused, seemed to reconsider his words. "You have people who appreciate you for who you are, not who someone else thinks you should be." "It is not that simple," Fiona said. "All my life, I have been told there is something wrong with me, that I am too loud, too much, too inappropriate. How can all of those people be wrong?" "Maybe they are not wrong for themselves," Travis said thoughtfully. "Maybe they need quiet voices and whispered conversations because that is what makes them comfortable. But that does not mean you are wrong for being different. The world is big enough for all kinds of people, Miss Dalton, including people with voices that carry." He touched his hat brim, a small gesture of respect. "I will see you at dinner, madam." He walked away, leaving Fiona standing on the porch with her parcels and a head full of thoughts she could not quite sort out. That night at dinner, she found herself watching Travis, noticing the way he engaged easily with the other boarders, how he drew out the shy school teacher with gentle questions, and made old Mr. Humphrey laugh with a story about a stubborn horse. He was, she realized, someone who made space for other people to be themselves. It was a rare quality. The weather turned colder as December arrived, and with it came the preparations for Christmas. Cordelia threw herself into planning a special dinner for the boarders, and Fiona helped enthusiastically. Despite her continued shunning by the town's respectable women, she found herself surprisingly happy. The work was satisfying, Cordelia was wonderful company, and the boarding house felt more like home than her parents' mansion in Boston ever had. Travis had become a regular presence in her daily life. He came in from the ranch most evenings, sometimes staying in town for several days when the work schedule allowed. They fell into an easy friendship, chatting while she cooked, and he helped with various tasks around the house. She learned that he loved poetry, but rarely told anyone because cowboys were not supposed to have such interests. He learned that she had studied piano for years and missed it terribly. They talked about books they had read, places they wanted to see, dreams they had for the future. What Fiona appreciated most was that Travis never seemed bothered by her voice. She could speak at her natural volume around him, could laugh when something struck her as funny, could call out from another room without feeling self-conscious. He responded to her words, not the volume at which she delivered them. It was profoundly liberating. One snowy evening in mid-December, most of the boarders had gone out to a town dance that was being held in the church hall. Cordelia had gone to help chaperone, and the school teacher was visiting family in Rapid City. That left only Fiona and Travis in the boarding house, along with old Mr. Humphrey, who was asleep upstairs. Fiona was in the kitchen, cleaning up after dinner and humming to herself. She did not hear Travis come in until he spoke. "That is a pretty song." She turned, startled, her hand flying to her chest. "You frightened me. I thought you had gone to the dance." "Not much for dancing," Travis said with a slight smile. "I am better with cattle than I am with dance steps, plus I wanted to get some reading done." He held up a book of poetry he had borrowed from Cordelia's small library. "Browning?" Fiona noted, seeing the title. "You know his work?" "I love his work." "How do I love thee? Let me count the ways." Everyone knows that one. "But have you read The Pied Piper of Hamelin?" Travis asked. "Only about 100 times as a child. I used to recite it to my younger cousins, using different voices for all the characters. My mother was appalled that I could be so loud and dramatic." Travis grinned. "I would have loved to see that." Without quite knowing how it happened, they ended up sitting at the kitchen table, drinking tea and discussing poetry. Travis proved to have strong opinions about meter and rhyme, and Fiona found herself arguing cheerfully with him about the merits of various poets. Their conversation ranged widely, from literature to politics to philosophy, and Fiona realized she was having more fun than she had had in months. At one point, she was making a passionate argument about the symbolism in Tennyson's work, gesturing enthusiastically, her voice ringing out clearly in the quiet kitchen. She suddenly stopped mid-sentence, remembering herself. "I'm sorry," she said, dropping her voice. "I'm being too loud again." Travis looked at her with something like confusion. "Why are you apologizing?" "I am practically shouting. It is not appropriate." "You are not shouting. You are just talking with enthusiasm. There is a difference." He leaned forward slightly. "Miss Dalton, can I tell you something? I like hearing you clearly. I like not having to strain to catch what you were saying or wondering if I missed something. Your voice is clear and strong, and there is nothing wrong with that." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes, which was ridiculous. She had cried more in the past few months than she had in years, but no one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever suggested that her voice was not a flaw to be corrected, but simply a characteristic to be accepted. "You mean that?" she said softly. "I do not say things I don't mean," Travis replied. "Life is too short for lying, especially about important things." "And you think this is important?" "I think you being yourself is important." "Yes." They looked at each other across the table, and something shifted in the air between them. Fiona felt her heart beating faster, felt a warmth spreading through her chest. Travis's dark eyes were serious and kind, and she realized with a start that she wanted to kiss him. The thought was so shocking and inappropriate that she stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her teacup. "It is late," she said, her voice unsteady. "I should finish cleaning up." If Travis noticed her sudden nervousness, he did not comment on it. He simply stood as well, helped her carry the cups to the sink, and bid her a quiet goodnight before heading upstairs. Fiona stood in the kitchen for a long moment afterward, her hands pressed against the counter, trying to calm her racing heart. She was falling in love with Travis Jennings. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. She had never been in love before. She had never met anyone who made her feel the way Travis did, seen, accepted, valued for who she actually was rather than who she was supposed to be. But what if he did not feel the same way? What if she was reading too much into simple kindness? And even if he did care for her, what future could they possibly have? He was a cowboy saving money to buy a ranch. She was a disgraced Boston lady working in her aunt's boarding house. Over the next week, Fiona tried to maintain a careful distance from Travis, afraid that if she spent too much time with him, she would give away her feelings, but Travis seemed to have other ideas. He sought her out more frequently, always finding reasons to talk with her, to help her with her work, to sit near her at dinner. He brought her small gifts. A pretty stone he had found while writing, a ribbon from the general store that matched her eyes, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. "You're going to give people the wrong idea," Cordelia said one evening after Travis had gone upstairs. She was smiling knowingly at Fiona. "What do you mean?" "I mean that boy is courting you and not subtly." "He's just being friendly," Fiona protested. "Friendly does not bring a woman ribbons that match her eyes, darling. Trust me on this." "But even if he does have feelings for me, it is impossible. I have nothing to offer him. No dowry, no family connections, nothing." Cordelia laughed. "Fiona, this is the Dakota territory, not Boston. People out here care less about dowries and family connections than they do about character and compatibility. If Travis Jennings cares for you, and I believe he does, it is because of who you are, not what you have." "But I am ruined," Fiona whispered. "I fled my family in disgrace. The respectable women in town shun me. What kind of wife would I make for a man trying to build a life here?" "A wonderful one, I suspect," Cordelia said firmly. "But you will never know unless you give it a chance. Stop hiding from the possibility of happiness, child. Life is too uncertain to waste time on fear." That conversation stayed with Fiona. She thought about it while she worked, while she lay in bed at night unable to sleep, while she watched Travis across the dinner table. Could it be possible? Could she actually have a future with someone like him? Could she be loved not despite her voice, but including it? The day before Christmas, a heavy snowstorm rolled through Hot Springs, dumping several inches of snow and making the roads nearly impassable. The boarding house was warm and cozy, filled with the smell of baking bread and roasting meat as Fiona and Cordelia prepared for the Christmas dinner they had planned. Most of the boarders were there. unable to venture out in the weather, and the house had a festive, intimate atmosphere. Travis had ridden in from the ranch that morning before the storm hit its peak, his horse covered in snow and his face red with cold. Fiona had helped him brush the snow from his coat and made him hot coffee, scolding him for risking the ride in such weather. "Could not miss Christmas with my favorite boarding house ladies," he said with a smile that made Fiona's heart do complicated things in her chest. That evening after dinner, the boarders gathered in the parlor. Someone produced a harmonica, and another boarder had a fiddle, and soon there was music filling the house. The school teacher, who had returned just before the storm, sang carols in a sweet, soft voice. Old Mr. Humphrey told stories of Christmases past. It was, Fiona thought, as close to perfect as a moment could be. Then someone suggested that Fiona should sing. She immediately shook her head. "My voice is not suited for singing. I am too loud." "Nonsense," Cordelia said. "You have a beautiful voice. I have heard you singing while you work." "Please, Miss Dalton," the school teacher said shyly, "I would love to hear you." Fiona looked around at the expectant faces, felt panic rising in her throat, but then her eyes met Travis's, and he gave her a small, encouraging nod. She took a deep breath. "What should I sing?" "Something we all know," someone suggested, "so we can join in." Fiona thought for a moment, then began to sing Silent Night. Her voice was indeed loud, filling the room and echoing off the walls, but it was also clear and true and full of feeling. After the first verse, the others joined in, but Fiona's voice rose above them all, strong and unapologetic. When the song ended, there was a moment of silence, and then everyone clapped. "That was beautiful," the school teacher said, her eyes shining. "You ought to sing in church," Mr. Humphrey declared. "Give that choir something to aspire to." Fiona flushed with pleasure. They sang more carols together, and this time Fiona did not hold back, letting her voice ring out freely. Travis did not sing much, but he watched her with an expression that made her feel warm all the way through. Later, after the music had ended and most people had drifted off to bed, Fiona found herself alone in the kitchen again. She was banking the fire in the stove when Travis appeared in the doorway. "That was something special tonight," he said quietly. "It was a lovely evening," Fiona agreed, not looking at him. She was suddenly nervous, aware that they were alone, aware of how much she had let him see of herself. "Fiona." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it made her look up. He crossed the kitchen in a few strides, stopping just in front of her. "I need to say something, and I'm not great with words that are not written down, so please be patient with me." "All right," she whispered. "I came out here to South Dakota to build a life for myself, to work hard, save money, eventually get my own place. I have been focused on that goal for 3 years now, and I never let anything distract me from it." He paused, seemed to gather himself. "Then I met you, and suddenly all I can think about is how much better that life would be if you were in it." Fiona's breath caught. "Travis, I know I do not have much to offer right now. I'm just a ranch hand with some savings and a dream. But I am good at what I do, and I have prospects. In another year, maybe 2, I will have enough to buy land and start my own herd. I could build you a house, nothing fancy at first, but solid and warm. And I promise you, Fiona Dalton, that if you agree to be my wife, I will never ask you to be quieter or smaller or anything other than exactly who you are." Tears were streaming down Fiona's face now. "You want to marry me?" "More than I have ever wanted anything." Travis reached out and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "I love your voice. I love your laugh. I love how passionate you get when you're talking about something that matters to you. I love that you are brave enough to be yourself even when the world tells you not to be. I love you, Fiona." "I love you too," Fiona said, the words tumbling out loud and clear and joyous. "I've been trying not to because it seemed impossible, but I love you so much." Travis smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "Then will you marry me? Will you take a chance on a cowboy who is not much good at anything except loving you?" "Yes," Fiona said. It's yes, absolutely yes. He kissed her then, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, they were both grinning like fools. We should tell your aunt, Travis said. She already knows, Cordelia's voice came from the doorway, startling them both. She was standing there in her nightgown and wrapper, smiling broadly. I heard your voices. Well, mostly I heard Fiona's voice because that girl could not whisper if her life depended on it. Bless her heart. Congratulations to you both. They were married in early February 1886 in a small ceremony at the church with Cordelia and a handful of friends in attendance. Mrs. Sutherland and her ladies' auxiliary were conspicuously absent, but Fiona did not care. She stood beside Travis in her best dress, holding his work-roughened hands, and promised to love and honor him for the rest of her life. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Travis kissed her soundly, and Fiona laughed out loud, the sound echoing through the little church. They spent their first few months of marriage living in a room at the boarding house while Travis continued to work at the Running Creek Ranch. It was cramped and not particularly private, but Fiona had never been happier. She continued to help Cordelia run the boarding house during the day, and in the evening she and Travis would talk for hours, planning their future. Travis was true to his word about saving money. He lived frugally, worked long hours, and put aside every penny he could spare. Fiona helped by continuing her work at the boarding house and taking in mending from some of the other ranches. The work was hard, but they were working towards something, and that made all the difference. In June of that year, Travis heard about a piece of land for sale about 15 miles north of Hot Springs. It was 160 acres of decent grazing land with a small creek running through it. The price was more than fair because the previous owner had died, and his widow wanted to move back east to her family. Travis and Fiona rode out to see it on a borrowed horse, with Fiona sitting behind Travis, her arms around his waist. The land was beautiful, in a stark, windswept way. Rolling hills covered in grass, the creek running clear and cold, a view that stretched for miles. There was already a small cabin on the property, rough but solid, and a barn that needed some repairs but was structurally sound. "What do you think?" Travis asked, his voice hopeful. Fiona looked around at the vast open space, at the big sky overhead, at the little cabin that could become a home. She thought about the life they could build here, away from judgmental eyes and whispered criticisms. She thought about children running through these hills, about growing old with Travis in this wild, free place. "I think it is perfect," she said. They bought the land with their combined savings and a small loan from the bank. Travis gave notice at the Running Creek Ranch, and in July they moved to their new property. The cabin was tiny, just one room with a loft, but it was theirs. Fiona threw herself into making it a home, sewing curtains for the windows and scrubbing every surface until it gleamed. Travis worked on repairing the barn and building fences, preparing for the small herd of cattle he planned to purchase in the fall. Their nearest neighbors were 3 miles away, a family named the Harpers, who had a slightly larger spread and 3 young children. Mary Harper was the first to visit, riding over with her youngest child balanced in front of her on the saddle. She was a cheerful, practical woman in her early 30s who took one look at Fiona and declared them friends. "We do not stand on ceremony out here," Mary said. "We help each other out, share what we have, and do not judge each other's business. Anyone who survived even one winter in this territory has earned respect in my book." Fiona liked Mary immediately. She was warm and welcoming, and when Fiona laughed at something funny, Mary just laughed along with her, no criticism or disapproval. Over the following months, the 2 women became close friends. Mary taught Fiona practical skills she had never learned in Boston: how to preserve meat, how to make soap, how to birth a calf when the timing was wrong. Fiona taught Mary's children their letters and numbers, and shared books from the small collection she and Travis were building. The first winter in their cabin was hard. The wind howled through cracks they had not properly chinked, and the cold was bitter and unrelenting. Snow piled up around the cabin, sometimes drifting higher than the windows. There were days when it was too dangerous to go outside, when they huddled near the fire and rationed their food, hoping the storm would break before their supplies ran out. But there was also a strange beauty to those hard months. Fiona and Travis grew even closer, forced to rely completely on each other. They talked for hours, read to each other by firelight, made love under piles of quilts while the wind screamed outside. Travis taught Fiona to play poker, and she taught him to make decent bread. They made each other laugh, kept each other warm, and survived. When spring finally came in April 1887, it felt like a miracle. The snow melted, the grass turned green, and their small herd of cattle that had survived the winter emerged from the barn looking thin but alive. Travis threw himself into the work of building up his ranch, and Fiona worked alongside him. She learned to ride better, to help with the cattle, to shoot a rifle to protect their stock from predators. That summer, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but had not said anything, afraid to jinx it. But when the baby's presence became undeniable, she told Travis one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "We are going to have a baby," she said simply. Travis turned to look at her, his eyes wide. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without a doctor confirming it, but yes, I am sure." He swept her into his arms, holding her tight, his face pressed against her hair. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby." Their son was born in March 1888, during a late winter storm that prevented the doctor from making it out to the ranch in time. Mary Harper came instead, bringing her experience and calm competence. The labor was long and painful, and there were moments when Fiona was afraid, but Mary talked her through it all, and Travis held her hand and refused to leave her side even when Mary suggested he might be more comfortable waiting outside. "I stay with my wife," he said firmly. When the baby finally arrived, healthy and squalling, Fiona cried with relief and joy. Travis held his son with shaking hands, staring down at the tiny face with an expression of absolute wonder. "We should name him after your father," Fiona said, exhausted but happy. "Thomas," Travis said. "Thomas James Jennings." Thomas was a loud baby, which seemed fitting. He cried with gusto, laughed with enthusiasm, and from the moment he could babble, he did so at impressive volume. Fiona loved every noisy moment of him. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. The ranch slowly grew as Travis worked tirelessly to build his herd and his reputation. Fiona managed their home, raised Thomas, and took on additional work when they needed extra money. She baked bread and pies to sell in Hot Springs, took in sewing, and even served as an unofficial midwife for some of the other ranch wives after helping Mary deliver her fourth child. They had 2 more children in the following years, a daughter named Rose in 1890 and another son named Daniel in 1893. The cabin was expanded twice to accommodate their growing family until it was a proper ranch house with multiple bedrooms and a real kitchen. The barn was rebuilt and enlarged. Fences stretched across their land, marking boundaries and pastures. It was not grand or fancy, but it was prosperous and solid in theirs. Fiona never did win over the ladies' auxiliary of Hot Springs. Mrs. Sutherland maintained her disapproval to the end of her days, occasionally making pointed comments about that loud ranch wife whenever Fiona came to town. But Fiona found she did not care anymore. She had built a community of her own. Mary and her family, other ranch wives who valued practicality over propriety, the school teacher who eventually married one of Travis's ranch hands, even Cordelia, who remained her closest confidant and frequent visitor. More importantly, she had built a life where she could be herself. On the ranch, her loud voice was an asset. She could call Travis in from the far pasture and he would actually hear her. She could yell at the children when they wandered too far from the house, and they would come running back. She could sing while she worked, laugh as loudly as she pleased, speak her mind without fear of judgment or correction. On their 10th wedding anniversary in February 1896, Travis took Fiona on a picnic despite the cold weather. They rode out to the place where he had first brought her to see the land, back when it was just a dream they were chasing. Now it was a reality, their home, their ranch, their legacy for their children. "Do you remember what you said when I first showed you this play?" Travis asked as they sat together on a blanket, looking out over land they knew intimately now. "I said it was perfect," Fiona replied. Do you still think so? Even after all the hard winters and difficult seasons and work that never seems to end? Fiona looked at her husband, at the lines the sun and wind had etched around his eyes, at the gray just beginning to show in his hair. She thought about their 3 children back at the house with Mary's oldest daughter watching them. She thought about the life they had built together, imperfect and difficult and absolutely real. I think it is more perfect than I ever imagined it could be, she said honestly. Not because it is easy, but because it is ours. Because I get to be myself here without apology. Because I have you, and you have never asked me to be anything other than what I am. Travis smiled and pulled her close. I fell in love with your voice before I fell in love with you, he said, echoing what he had once told her about his parents. I heard you laughing in Cordelia's boarding house, and I thought, that is a woman who knows who she is. That is a woman with nothing to hide. I wanted to know you, and knowing you has been the great privilege of my life. Fiona kissed him then, and if tears ran down her cheeks, they were happy ones. The years continued to pass, bringing the usual mixture of joy and sorrow that makes up any life. There were good years when the cattle prices were high and the weather cooperative. There were hard years when drought or disease threatened everything they had built. Thomas grew into a serious, responsible young man who loved the ranch and wanted nothing more than to work it alongside his father. Rose was wild and fearless, more comfortable on horseback than anywhere else. Daniel was the scholar of the family, always reading, always asking questions about the world beyond their hills. Fiona's voice never got quieter. If anything, it seemed to grow stronger with the years, ringing out across the ranch, calling her family home. And Travis never stopped telling her that he loved hearing her clearly, that her voice was one of his favorite sounds in all the world. In 1905, when Fiona was 42 and Travis was 48, they celebrated their 19th anniversary and the marriage of their eldest son Thomas to a sweet girl from Hot Springs whose family had moved to town 5 years earlier. The wedding was held at the ranch, with neighbors and friends coming from miles around to celebrate. Even some of the respectable families from town attended because by that time the Jennings family had earned a reputation for integrity and hard work that could not be ignored, regardless of how loud the matriarch's voice might be. Mary Harper, now in her 60s and a grandmother several times over, stood with Fiona watching the dancing and celebrating. You did good, Fiona, she said. You built something real here. We all did, Fiona replied. None of this would have been possible without friends like you. That cowboy of yours is still looking at you like you hung the moon, Mary observed, nodding toward where Travis stood talking with some of the other ranchers, but with his eyes frequently drifting to Fiona. I am very lucky, Fiona said softly. Luck has nothing to do with it. You two worked for this. You built it with your own hands and your own hearts. That is not luck. That is love and commitment. That night, after all the guests had finally left or bedded down in various corners of the house and barn, Fiona and Travis walked out to look at the stars. The sky was clear and vast, filled with more stars than could ever be counted. Do you ever think about what your life might have been like if you had stayed in Boston? Travis asked, his arm around her waist. Around her. Sometimes, Fiona admitted. I imagine myself in a grand house, married to that banker's son, living a life of quiet desperation. I imagine never laughing freely, never speaking my mind, never being truly known by anyone. She leaned into him. And then I am so grateful that I was brave enough to leave, that I found Cordelia, that I found you. I am the grateful one, Travis said. You could have chosen anyone, and you chose a poor cowboy with nothing but dreams. I chose the man who told me he liked hearing me clearly, Fiona corrected, the man who saw me as I actually was and loved me for it, not despite it. That is worth more than all the grand houses in Boston. They stood together in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of their ranch. Cattle lowing softly, horses shifting in the barn, the wind moving through the grass. And if Fiona hummed a tune from their courting days, And if her humming was loud enough to be heard all the way to the barn, well, Travis just smiled and held her closer. Their daughter Rose married in 1908, choosing a cowboy from a neighboring ranch who admired her fearlessness and riding skills. Daniel, their youngest, surprised everyone by announcing in 1910 that he wanted to go to college in Rapid City to study engineering. It was a difficult decision letting him go, but Fiona and Travis supported his dreams just as they had supported each other's. By 1915, when Fiona was 52 and Travis was 55, they were grandparents 3 times over. Thomas and his wife had 2 sons and a daughter. Rose had just had her first baby, a girl with her mother's spirit and her grandmother's powerful voice. The ranch was thriving under Thomas's management, and Travis was beginning to talk about stepping back, letting the younger generation take over the day-to-day operations. "We could travel," he suggested one evening as they sat on their porch, now weathered by nearly 30 years of sun and storms. "See some of the country we have only read about." "I would like that," Fiona said, "but wherever we go, I want to come back here. This is home." "Always," Travis agreed. "This will always be home." They did travel some in the years that followed, taking trips to see Daniel in Rapid City, where he was now working as an engineer and had married a school teacher. They visited Denver and Omaha, stayed in hotels, ate in restaurants, saw sights they had only imagined. But they always came back to the ranch, to the land they had built their life on, to the place where Fiona's voice could ring out across the hills without anyone telling her to hush. In 1920, Cordelia passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 85. She had lived long enough to see Fiona happy and settled, to know 5 great nieces and great nephews, to see the boarding house she had built continue to serve hot springs under new ownership. At her funeral, Fiona spoke about her aunt's courage and kindness, about how she had given refuge to a lost young woman and taught her that family was not just about blood, but about choosing to love and support each other. Fiona's voice rang out clear and strong in the church, and no one told her she was too loud. By that time, even the most proper citizens of Hot Springs had accepted that Fiona Jennings was who she was, and that was that. Travis retired fully from active ranch work in 1923 at the age of 63, though he still consulted with Thomas on major decisions and could often be found working on smaller projects around the property. Fiona, at 60, finally had time to pursue interests she had set aside during the busy years of raising children and building a ranch. She started a small lending library in Hot Springs, donating many of her own books to get it started. She taught reading to adults who had never learned, using her clear, strong voice to pronounce words carefully so they could learn. She wrote long letters to her children and grandchildren, preserving family stories and history for future generations. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management. He proved to have his father's work ethic and his mother's determination. Rose and her husband bought the property next to the family ranch and expanded the Jennings holdings. Daniel came home for visits as often as he could, bringing his wife and children to experience the place where he had grown up. By 1935, Fiona and Travis had been married for 49 years. They were in their 70s now, slowed by age, but still sharp in mind and devoted to each other. They had lived to see the automobile replace the horse, to see the telephone connect their remote ranch to the wider world, to see the Dust Bowl devastate other parts of the country while their land, carefully managed and protected, remained relatively stable. On a warm summer evening in July 1935, they sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. Their grandchildren's children were playing in the yard, the youngest generation of Jennings to run free on this land. Travis reached over and took Fiona's hand, the gesture as natural and comfortable as breathing. "Do you remember the first time we sat on a porch together?" he asked. "Back at Cordelia's boarding house?" "You helped me hang laundry," Fiona said, smiling at the memory. "I was so frustrated with those sheets. You said they had minds of their own. And you said I had a good laugh that sounded like joy." "I was right," Travis said. "I have been right about you from the very beginning. Loving you has been the easiest and best thing I ever did." "Even when I am too loud?" Fiona teased. "Especially when you are too loud," Travis replied. "Your voice has been my compass, Fiona. When I hear you, I know I am home. I know I am where I belong. I have never wanted you to be quieter or smaller or anything other than exactly who you are." Fiona squeezed his hand, feeling tears prick her eyes. After nearly 50 years, he could still move her with his simple, honest words. "I love you, Travis Jennings. You saved me, you know. Not from anything dramatic, but from a life of being half alive. You gave me permission to be fully myself, and that was the greatest gift anyone ever gave me." "You saved yourself," Travis said. "You were brave enough to leave Boston, brave enough to start over, brave enough to risk loving someone. I just recognized what was already there." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their great-grandchildren play, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling in for the evening. Fiona's voice rose as she called out a warning to one of the children who was climbing too high in a tree, and the child immediately scrambled down to a safer height. Travis chuckled. "Still louder than a steam whistle," he said fondly. "And you still love hearing me clearly," Fiona replied. "Always," Travis said. "Always and forever." They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in February 1936 with a huge party at the ranch. Family came from across the state and beyond. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, old friends and neighbors, people whose lives had been touched by Fiona and Travis over the decades. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, stories and tears. Fiona at 73 still had the loudest laugh in the room, and Travis at 76 still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. During the celebration, their grandson Jake, Thomas's eldest son, who was now helping run the ranch, stood up to make a toast. "My grandparents have shown me what love looks like," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Not perfect love, because perfect is boring, but real love. Love that works through problems, that grows through hardship, that celebrates each other's true selves. Grandma Fiona, you have the clearest, strongest voice of anyone I know, and I hope you never stop using it. Grandpa Travis, thank you for teaching us all what it means to truly see and value the person you love. Here is to 50 more years." "I will be 126, Travis protested, laughing, "but I will do my best." The years continued on. Travis's health began to decline in 1938, a slow process that frustrated him, but that he bore with as much grace as he could muster. Fiona cared for him devotedly, and he joked that even at the end, her voice was the thing that kept him anchored to the world. He died peacefully in January 1940 with Fiona holding his hand, and their children and grandchildren gathered around. His last words were, "I love hearing you clearly." Fiona was devastated by his loss, but she was not broken. She had loved Travis for 54 years, and his love had given her the strength to be fully herself. She honored his memory by continuing to live fully and loudly, by speaking her mind, by laughing with her grandchildren, by being present and engaged with the world around her. She lived another 15 years, dying in her sleep in March 1955 at the age of 92. At her funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives she had touched, children she had taught to read, women she had helped through difficult births, neighbors she had supported through hard times, and of course, her enormous family. They buried her next to Travis on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The Jennings Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, each generation adding their own mark while honoring the foundation that Fiona and Travis had laid. The story of how they met and fell in love became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren. The story of a woman who was shunned for having a voice too loud for ladies, and a cowboy who said, "I like hearing you clearly." It was a love story for the ages, proof that the right person does not try to change you, but instead celebrates exactly who you are. It was a testament to courage, to the bravery it takes to be yourself in a world that often demands conformity. And it was a reminder that true love is not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone who sees your imperfections and loves you not despite them, but including them wholly and completely. In the end, Fiona Dalton Jennings lived a life that was full and rich and entirely her own. She raised a beautiful family, built a successful ranch, contributed to her community, and spent more than half a century with a man who loved her exactly as she was. Her voice, once considered her greatest flaw, became her defining characteristic, the thing people remembered about her long after she was gone. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Travis Jennings was surely still telling her that he loved hearing her clearly, and Fiona was surely still laughing, loud and joyful and free.